response be? Will we stay there and wait and see what's going to happen next? Will we dare to identify with him, knowing he's treated as a criminal, soon to die? What would our answer be? I think that is something to think about. None of the disciples chose to carry the cross, but Joseph of Arimathea, the other Simon from Cyrene, right, was the one who was chosen to carry the cross. And he was one that was not the 12 disciples of Jesus, but definitely he was a disciple of Jesus, because taking on that fact, it was his privilege and honor. Having heard about Jesus, he was happy to carry the cross. He felt it was a great privilege for him. Perhaps we may not first carry our cross as the one who is ready to die, but we may have to first start carrying our cross with Jesus, with him along with us. Will we be willing to take that first step in carrying our cross, knowing that we may be subject to tough challenges ahead? The cross was an instrument of death. When they think of cross at the time, they only could think of death, the worst form of torture imaginable. And that was a symbol of total commitment. When Jesus said to carry your cross, he meant that you must be prepared to die, you must be prepared to go through whatever it takes along the way to the crucifixion place. It means that whatever happens, will you still choose to follow Jesus? When he first called just now at the idea of hating the family, to love God above all things, now he's saying to carry your cross, be ready to commit, even though the cost may be very difficult. That can only happen, of course, when we are disciples of Jesus. Just as last week we mentioned the idea of the disciples who, even though they didn't understand what was Jesus doing, why was he breaking all the cultural norms in talking to a Samaritan woman? Why was he doing such a thing? And they were wondering, but they did not question Jesus, because they were there as disciples to follow, to learn, to listen, and perhaps to understand what is Jesus doing that we could not understand. And likewise, as disciples of Jesus, we are called to follow him. At times, we may not understand why we must suffer. At times, we may not understand what is his plan. But we are nevertheless called to follow him. Perhaps starting with the small things, in waking up each day, as I shared in last week's New Year message, in starting each day with Jesus, surrendering our plans to him, being a disciple. Perhaps he calls us to start with something simple, in sharing our faith with others, making disciples. Perhaps he calls us to start in loving others, in being loving, like yesterday or a few days ago in our 10 days of prayer, in being a loving and lovable Christian. There is a first step that we may take before we may come all the way to carry our cross fully. The third step is talking about to come and follow. And the idea of there is that in following him, there is the sitting down and counting the cost. No one who builds something, right, must first calculate that it finishes. Unfortunately, during the pandemic we have seen in Singapore, there are buildings that are not completed. I have a nearby CC near my place. I was looking at it, I said, when will this ever built finish? I look at it for 1 year, it looks the same, I never seen the builders coming in. And soon enough, after a year, finally this year, I look at the announcement, they say, oh, unfortunately the main contractor couldn't continue the project because of not enough funds, and now they will be looking for a new contractor. Thankfully, they had the opportunity to still hopefully continue the project. But we have also seen in places overseas, right, places that may have been built and cities that may have been overgrown, right, with plants. I'm sure you have seen. You may have seen different places that have been built but yet to be completed. And that looks funny, right? When people look at it, it's like, what are people doing? Why are they building things that cannot be completed? Run out of funds halfway at the cities. But that is the idea of discipleship as well. If we try to follow Jesus, but we don't commit all the way, and people look at us and say, looks funny, right? This Christian trying, not really following, but trying to follow. And it's not that we don't grow in Jesus. I think people can all see genuine effort, genuine trying, but it is when we just say, this is only the level I follow, and this is what it means to be a disciple or Christian, then perhaps that it might be funny. It's like someone building a city and say, okay lah, no need to build finish. this amount, this level is enough. It will look strange, right? Won't it? And that's the same idea in terms of building, and as well as the idea of fighting a war, as mentioned, conquering the army. If we go into a battle seeing that we cannot overcome, then it doesn't make sense. But of course, we know with God, even with less people, even Gideon with 300 men can overcome 185,000 men. That is possible, right? But that is when we know God is with us. But when we don't calculate the cost of discipleship, then we may be wondering how, and it will look strange, and that's when discipleship doesn't quite work out. And so there is life's journey, as we journey upwards in discipleship. It is calling for us to count the cost, to be ready as we journey together. Today, as we look at it together, we are also reminded in our communion the example that Jesus has set for us, to wash one another's feet, to set an example for Him, that we maybe also learn of Him, to be humble, to be lowly in spirit. That Jesus has set the example as His disciples. We are also called to wash one another's feet, both in the symbol, but also in washing of our hearts, that we may do so. Today, as we we will be partaking of the communion elements. We will be taking the bread and wine, symbolized by Jesus' body and blood that is poured out